taste. You can see. And I want to point out before I start that this painting that I chose is by Marguerite Girard, who is a really wonderful romantic woman painter, and one of the only ones that's currently recognized. So I chose this, and the painting is called The Piano Lesson. So, introduction. I'm going to be mainly focusing on Clara Wieck Schumann, Pauline Viardot-Garcia, and Fanny Hensel Mendelssohn, who are contemporaries of the time. So the main hurdles that are my themes that I'm going to include are their unsupportive families or spouses, their fear of losing social standing because depending on their financial bracket, being a performer might not have been considered a good profession for them, their subordinates to dominant males, especially fathers and husbands, having children because birth control is not readily accessible. That was a huge struggle among married couples, especially when the women were trying to have careers, maintaining a household, because that was also a full-time job at the time, and overcoming stigmas about women working and creating, as women were not supposed to be working, especially if they were married. And the current biases that I've been looking at them in research and programming, which have been really apparent through my own research that's happening right now, where I've been finding a lot of factual places that have been saying things like, oh, not as good, or just comparisons that don't need to be happening, and programming, because we don't see these women programmed nearly enough, despite the incredible music that they've written. So first is Clara Wieck Schumann, who was born in 1819 and passed away in 1896. She was born in Leipzig, Germany, and she was a composer as well as a virtuosic concert pianist. She was a child prodigy, a Wunderkind. Her parents were Friedrich Wieck and Marianne Traumlitz. Her father had a piano store and taught piano lessons, and her husband, Robert Schumann, was a student of his. But I want to talk about her mother a little bit, who we don't hear very much about. Marianne Traumlitz was a really prolific performer and would sing pretty much every weekend, and she was also an excellent piano player. And as a result, on top of being married, running a household, and having multiple children, including Clara, Friedrich expected her to be teaching piano lessons to all of his top students. As a result, she left him pretty early on, when Clara was 5 years old, for her piano teacher. Clara could play piano before speaking, which really reflects her arts education. She prepared in the Leipzig Gewandhaus at the age of 9, no pressure, and her first major composition was her Opus 7, her A minor piano concerto. If you haven't listened to it, I really recommend looking it up because I can't sing it. So, for her early life, she mostly performed and toured with her father all over Europe, and she was honored by the Austrian court in 1838. But then, in 1840, she married Robert Schumann, much to the dismay of her father, which caused her to break off entirely from him. She focused more on composition while she was married to Robert because performing was not as easy, though she did go on a couple tours while married to Russia. And especially after Robert passed away, she was touring all over Europe and England and Russia. And Pauline Viardot, our friend that we'll meet later, is somebody that she met in Leipzig in 1838. So I will be singing two pieces from her Opus 12, which is also Robert's Opus 37. This was published in 1841, which was their first year of marriage, and they're all love songs, which kind of reflects where she was at that time period. So Liebesturmschönheit means Love Thou for Beauty, and that is the first of the three songs that were in the joint publication. It's really important to realize that Robert decided that he and Clara should publish this together, and didn't specify which pieces were written by Robert and which ones were written by Clara, which shows that he did try to show her as an equal when they were working together. And it's on original manuscripts, it's often where you'll see edited by Clara Schumann. So he was really careful to include her name. The texts are all by Friedrich Rückert, and this first one is very popular, and it's been set by many others like Gustav Mahler, and I've sung that piece too. That's also great. So, listening roadmap, I want you guys to listen for in the first piece the text painting that will happen. So there's a word Frühling, which means spring, and that's the brightest part of the melody, where it's faster and choppier. And the word immer, which is one of the last words I sing, which is also the longest word, which is funny because it means forever. piece I'll sing is Er ist gekommen in Sturm und Regen. He is coming in storm and rain. And this is a really interesting accompaniment. It's very virtuosic and stormy. Liz Blood can attest to that, I'm sure. And so it's very stormy at the beginning, but at the end there's a really peaceful section that represents spring and calmness after storms in love. And one quote that I assume some of you have read, but I'd like to read out loud, really represents how Clara thought of herself as a composer, or didn't think of herself as a composer. I finally succeeded in completing 3, which I will present to him at Christmas. If they're really of little value, merely a very weak attempt, I am counting on Robert's forbearance and hope that he will understand that it was done with the best will in the world in order to fulfill this wish of his, just as I fulfill all his other wishes. So, with no further ado, Liebstum Schönheit and Er ist gekommen.
Sie trägt ein großes Haar.
very sick before recitals and sometimes having to cancel and reschedule them. And she would have severe arm and finger pain, which is really not great when you're a concert pianist. But she did start a really important trend with Liszt, where they were two of the first virtuoso piano players who would perform completely memorized, which is a tradition that's held up today. And she also really was a big part in bringing back Beethoven and Bach to being popular, because she would perform them constantly. So she performed in recitals, concerts, and salons, which are different, because the recitals she would host, the concerts were bigger events open to the public, whereas salons were private events, usually held in people's houses. And in the salons, that's where she would play more experimental music, especially Robert's, that he was trying to get out to the public. And she would play Robert's music diligently. She really wanted to promote him and really succeeded in making him famous in a lot of parts of the world. But if she played her own music, which wasn't very often, she would usually accompany one of the leads that she wrote. So she would have a singer sing while she would accompany them. She wouldn't play her own piano compositions very often. So Clara's hurdles, there were a lot of them. She only had a music and arts education. Her father started taking her to the theater and the opera when she was 6 years old, but neglected to give her a normal education, which made her a lot less well-rounded than many of her contemporaries. She lost both of her female role models at the age of 5, because the same year that her mother left was the year that her nanny was fired. So she grew up without a constant maternal figure, which I think is a big part in how she's a little bit sexist towards women and to herself. She was quoted to say that women can't compose because there was never a woman who could do it. But obviously, she was a pretty great composer. She was held to very high standards by her father, which obviously really stressed her out when she was estranged from him after marrying Robert Schumann. Her father tried to sabotage her career by doing a lot of awful things, including being seen in public with a lot of the other female virtuosos, and he would write her hate mail under a pseudonym right before she'd be performing, so not very helpful. She had 8 children and had to see 4 of them die within her lifetime, some through miscarriage and some who were alive. She supported her family through performing, especially while Robert was sick and couldn't support them, and after he passed away. That's when she had to foster her children with her friends and family, so she could just perform all the time to have a constant income. And she worked by teaching and performing for her entire life. She retired from performing when she was 72, but continued to teach until she died. And I really want to point out, just with the research bias, that Clara Schumann's Legacy on Britannica is represented in 5 very small paragraphs, sentences really, as opposed to Robert Schumann's 15 paragraphs that are huge and contribute to pages, which I don't think is very fair, considering I would say that I demonstrated that she lived a fuller and longer life and did more stuff than he did. So they should at least have an equal representation. Next, I want to talk and sing about Pauline Viardot-Garcia. So she was a famous vocalist. She was a soprano and a mezzo-soprano. She fit pretty much any role. A composer and a pianist, which I'll talk about later. She was born into a family of singers. Her father, Manuel Garcia, was a very famous vocalist and writer. He would write lots of books on vocal technique and pedagogy. She took pianos from lessons from a young age with Franz Liszt, so she was awesome at piano, but had to learn how to sing instead after her father and Marie Malibran, her older sister, passed away. Her mother told her, "You must close your piano forever, for now you must sing," which is a little unfortunate because she really loved playing piano, and she was supposed to be her family's accompanist, but instead she had to sing to represent her family. She married Louis Viardot in 1840, who was the director of the Opera Italienne, Teatro Italien, which was an Italian opera. But he left his job after they got married so he could tour with her full-time, which meant that she was the main breadwinner. And she was very close to Ivan Turgenev, who is a really famous Russian writer, because when she toured in Russia, that's when she met him. And there's a lot of speculation about that relationship, but it's not about my presentation, so I'm not going to talk about it. So Pauline Viardot-Garcia managed to inspire Meyerbeer, Gounod, Brahms, Robert Schumann, and Saint-Saëns to all write amazing music for her. And that's really representative of her personality, like how she could draw people in and how they all wanted to create for her, and her virtuosity overall. I will be singing two pieces, Fleur de Sucé and Berceuse Cossack. Fleur de Sucé means dried or wilted flower, and it's translated from Alexander Pushkin's Russian to French by her close friend Louis Pommet. This was performed in salons mostly, so she wouldn't really do this in big concert settings. It was more for private settings. And I want you to listen for the B section, where it's tonally varied, because it starts out with a really lovely flowing accompaniment. And then when the singer starts asking questions, the accompaniment pounds octaves and clashing chords. So listen for that part. And the next one is Berceuse Cossack, which means Cossack lullaby. It's in 3/4 and it's in A minor, and there's a constant A pedal tone almost completely through the piece, except for one line where I sing "Don't Be Afraid of Storms," which I don't know why it is, but it's interesting that the whole piece has that A, except for that one measure. So this is a lullaby from a Russian mother to her son, while the son's father, her husband, is off at war. And I really encourage you to read the poem because it's heartbreaking. And again, this was another translation from Louis Pommet because the text was by Mikhail Lermontov. And this is sometimes performed with piano and voice, but a lot of the time there will be also a violin added in, and you'll hear that in the piano descant in the higher notes, how it sounds a little bit like a violin. And I believe that this was an encore piece that she would sing in Russia when everyone wanted her to sing again. So Pauline Verdot ran and performed in 2 salons, which is important to note. And I want to cite real quick Lydia Beasley-Muir, who wrote an amazing dissertation on one of her operettas that she wrote that I got most of the information from through here. So the 2 salons were her home, Chateau de Courtavenel in Brie, and Villa Turgenev, which was Turgenev's home. So the Chateau de Courtavenel was a renovated attic, which Turgenev named Le Théâtre des Pommes de Terre, which means the theater of potatoes, because the price of admission for everybody was to bring a potato to watch any performances. So Pauline Verdot wrote a lot of operettas and salon operas, especially Le Dernier Saussure in 1867, and they're often harshly critiqued, but after reading this dissertation, I understood why. Pauline Verdot wrote these as learning operas for her students because she ran a studio from her home in Baden-Baden. And she wrote it for a young, not completely developed voice as opposed to an older voice. So when people think, oh, these melodies, they're not very heavy, it's because they weren't supposed to be. Her salons were frequented by a lot of top musicians and artists, including Rossini and Berlioz. And Turgenev would write the librettos for most of the operas, and Louis Verdot and Turgenev would both perform roles, sometimes filling in for the other when one was too busy. And Pauline Verdot would accompany her operettas when her students were performing. And I like this quote because it mentions Clara, that Clara Schumann, like others who attended these performances, was impressed by the way that Pauline had trained her children and pupils who took part in the operettas. So I want to talk about Clara and Pauline, obviously, because they were lifelong pen pals, friends, and colleagues. They would perform together, and they also wrote music together. So they wrote music together mostly early on, because Clara was rather intimidated by Pauline's composing chops, which she wrote to Robert about, which I think is unfortunate, because obviously we all compare ourselves to each other all the time, but Clara was intimidated by another woman who had different skills than she did. There was a serious divide between their French and German musical ideals, which is really apparent when you read their correspondence, especially after a rather awkward rift that happened between them when Pauline wrote in a letter that Clara should take care of herself more often after Clara was pregnant with probably her 5th child. Meanwhile, Pauline had only had 1 up to that point. And Clara wrote back a very heated letter about how Pauline only performs for the applause, whereas Robert plays for the appreciation of music, and that she couldn't tell her that she was not as good as her husband, and blah, blah, blah. It was really unfortunate, but Pauline reconciled with her, and they performed soon afterwards, so then everything was okay. But I'm sure it was still a little awkward once you accuse somebody of insulting your husband when they're worried about you getting pregnant all the time. So Clara arranged for the employment of Pauline's daughter Louise at the conservatory in Frankfurt, and Clara spent a lot of summers in Baden-Baden with Pauline. So Pauline Biardot's main hurdles were that she wanted to play piano. She didn't want to sing very much, but she obviously sang beautifully and had an amazing, prolific career, but she really wanted to be a virtuoso pianist. She had to hold up the weight of the family name, which I talked about earlier, and she faced constant comparisons with her sister, Maria Malibran, who I'll talk about next, or two from now, because Maria was considered to be the beautiful, tragic soprano, and Pauline was considered to be the one with the really great personality. She lost her father and her sister, and then had to change her career, which was a lot of effort. She supplied the main income for her home and for her family, especially when Biardot, her husband, quit his job. And she had children at difficult times. Her first daughter, Louise, was born right before she was supposed to start touring in Russia. So she had to separate from her daughter and have her mother take care of her while she was in Russia, which I can imagine was very hard for her. And as a result, I think she planned with Louis Biardot because they didn't have children for many years after that, because she wanted to focus on her career first. And Turgenev and Louis Biardot were much older than she was, so she had to support them when they were sick and old, while having a career and while teaching and while running the salon. Next is Fanny Hensel Mendelssohn, who was a little bit older than the rest of them. She lived from 1805 to 1847, and she composed through her whole life. So you guys know Felix Mendelssohn, I assume. Well, she had the same teachers as him. Felix Mendelssohn is her brother, common misconception, so they're siblings. And they grew up with the same teachers. And she married Wilhelm Hensel in 1829, who was an excellent artist. This is an illustration that he made of her, which I think is really nice. So 6 of Fanny's songs were published under Felix's name in his opus 8 and 9. So it was really nice of him that he published her music when she couldn't. But not so nice that he didn't cite her or credit her at all. But there was a lot of pressure with the Mendelssohn family name because they were Jewish, and in society that wasn't considered acceptable anymore. So I think there was a lot of fear towards that, which constricted both Fanny and Felix. So Fanny Hensel ran a prolific music salon that had professional performers who played really unusual and different repertoire regularly. And she had a very diverse guest list, which I really appreciated to read about. And for performing, so she debuted as a young girl, and then she would play for charity events, but she never really played for money. But she did conduct and accompany a small church choir, and program really impressive music for them very regularly. She didn't publish her music until 1846. Which was the year before she died, but she did get to see it published and printed. So I will be singing Nachtwanderer, Night Wanderer, which is in the key of F, and it's in 9/8, which is really hard for me to count. So she really is a little bit more tonally ambiguous than the first two. She employs a lot of accidentals that take the listener away from F major, which is noticeable in the first line, which is Mixolydian, and it holds a B flat for added suspense before the singer answers the question that's posed by it. And there are obvious romantic themes of the wanderer, nature, and the nightingale, which really brings us as a true theme. the same privileges. For example, they would work with the same teachers and do the same assignments, but Felix would get to hear his music performed and would get to perform his music, whereas she was not allowed to. I mentioned earlier that she was published under Felix's name pretty regularly, which isn't very fair. But to sort of understand why, her father, this is a direct quote, said about music, "For you it can and must only be an ornament, never the basis of your being and doing," which just about sums up what she was under with her family pressure. I would say that out of the three so far, Fanny Hensel is the first to truly consider herself to be a composer, but unfortunately she was the most pushed to not think of herself as a composer out of the three. So she was unable to perform easily, and she did not perform for money because that would look poorly on her family, which was of a slightly higher social class than Gerdos or Schumann's. Being Jewish and a woman was a really uncomfortable intersection at this time period. There were the conservatories that were opening that only catered to men who were not Jewish. So the whole Wagnerian ideals that were coming around really put her at a disadvantage. And my research bias for her was a quote that I found from the Library of Congress. "Her talents appeared to be nearly as formidable as those of her more famous brother," which I thought it was really unfortunate in official definition that somebody felt the need to create an automatic bias for somebody who wasn't able to be performed as much and able to publish as much, as opposed to wasn't as good as. So she had to run a household as well as probably one of the most successful salons, and wasn't published until the last year of her life. So those were her hurdles. For composers. So these two I want to mention I have a little bit less on, but I really wanted to include them to fully round out the program and the themes and the music. So this is Maria Felicita Malibran, who was Pauline Verdon's older sister. And she was a really famous soprano, bel canto, opera singer. She was like the singer of the time. She did her debut in the King's Theatre in London in 1825 as Rosina in the Barber of Seville, which is no small debut to have. She was under serious pressure from her father, Manuel Garcia, as she was the one who was supposed to uphold the family name at that point. And it really wore on her to the point where she had a rushed marriage to a banker, Francois Malibran, to escape her father, but it didn't work out very well. So she left him for the violinist Charles de Berriot, who was also pretty famous at the time. She had a much more scandalous life. She lived with Berriot out of wedlock, and they had a child together. And then one unfortunate day when she was 28 years old, she got in an accident horseback riding, and she did not, it says, I wrote this for a reason. It says she died in a horseback accident, but she didn't. She was in a terrible accident, but had a concert the next day. So went, performed the concert, and then passed out afterwards, and that's when she died. So that really shows her work ethic. This is one of my favorite pieces to sing this semester. This is Les Brigands, the Bandits. It's different than the past songs. I wouldn't even classify it so much as a lead. Well, it's in French, so definitely not. But as a French art song, I would say it is. It's more of an operetta-ish song because of the leaps and the range that are required for the singer to sing. It's in D minor and it's in 2/4, and the accompaniment really imitates the text. It sets the scene from the very beginning, where you can hear the horse's hooves in the accompaniment. And the climax of the piece is on measure 83 on the words du sang, which means the blood. And as the singer, this is the part where I'm imagining somebody has just been killed for money, and I'm freaking out. It's also some of the highest notes that I sing. And yeah, I really think that for somebody who, again, did not consider herself to be a composer, this is a really ambitious piece to be writing, and also shows that she expected a lot of an average soprano's ability to sing.
Signor,
as a result was not a real contemporary of the other women, but I really like how this piece sort of represents a change where it's the end of Romanticism shifting into the next period because it tests tonality while retaining a lot of the German Lied characteristics that you've been hearing. So this poem, Laue Sommernacht, Mild Summer Night, is by Joseph Freer von Eichendorff, and it's a very romantic poem set to a more tonally interesting accompaniment. There are themes like the summer night and falling in love and meeting somebody in the woods and finding each other's souls. So it's a really lovely poem. And I just, obviously you hear this, but the accompaniment doesn't completely resolve at the end, which I think is really beautiful in its own way. So that was Sommernacht. These hurdles are not recognized enough when we think about women composers. We usually, I think, consider them to have had the same privileges as their white male counterparts because they were from the same time period, but we don't think about all the other things that they had to be doing at that time. I'm representing a lot of composers who didn't think of themselves as composers, which is deeply upsetting, which is why I think we need to program them more often to show that we know they are composers. And I also need to note, as a women's studies minor, that this is not a completely intersectional presentation because unfortunately women composers of color were not studied and their works weren't retained, and we don't really know too many of them from the Romantic era especially. So I would love to talk about that, but I don't have the information to be able to present. And I want to note our department's contribution to women composers over the year, especially from Dr. Cook and Peggy Gotts, who have both been really careful to program a lot of gorgeous music by women composers, especially after our Amy Beach year last year, which was a total blast. And it's really great that we get to learn and listen to this music as majors at UNH. So I think that this music is all equally interesting and musically satisfying as their male counterparts, and which is proven by the joint publications where people could literally not tell the difference between the music. And yeah, I challenge you all to try to listen for the ladies and maybe double check for repertoire before getting stuck in the same box as usual. So thank you so much to everyone who supported me. This is a quick thank you because it's not my senior recital, but thank you so much, Liz Blood, for accompanying me. Victoria for page turning, to Dr. Cook for supporting me and making this possible musically, and to Dr. Rose Brooksma for making this all possible and guiding me even when this was a bit of a mess. So thank you so much.
Set lyrics by women?
Sometimes they did. Fanny Hensel was more likely to program. She wrote a couple pieces, and I don't know if it wasn't. I read this morning, where she'd write a lot of pieces based on popular text, but also went out of the box to a bunch of poems that a lot of people hadn't heard. But there weren't a lot that were written, but. I'd say Amy Beach definitely wrote a lot of text by women, especially because she wrote a lot of her own texts. Hi, Morgan.
Hi. Do you know how much information there is on classical women composers and maybe Baroque? Is there even any information out there?
Yes, there are. They're great, and they're in one of my favorite anthologies that I would be glad to lend you.
Okay.
And their names are all escaping me, but they existed, and they were also awesome. But this is my favorite time period to listen to, so that's why I picked them.
Who is your favorite composer of the group?
Who was my favorite? That's a really good question. I guess my favorite song to sing was Les Brigands, but my favorite composer is probably Clara overall. Taryn.